Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be part 5 in this series on the Omphalos. I'll put some related videos in the description and also links to the previous episodes of this series. Now, let's begin. So, the navel of the world, or the Omphalos, is the navel or the belly button of the world, the center of the world. And it is a consistent common theme across cultures across the world. So, for instance, Mount Kailash in Tibet is referred to as the navel of the world. These cross-cultural connections are interesting because, firstly, for instance, a navel stone or umbilicus or a central stone is a point from which all roads are measured. Now, Mount Kailash is a point from which all the rivers run, which is a very similar theme, but it also resembles the famous Omphalos, for instance, at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, or the Benben stones of Egypt. We have a similar feature, the center of the world, but also the center of creation. For instance, in Genesis, we have the waters, and then the sun, and the land rose from the waters, and the first place that the sun touches the land, this creation point, is so similar to the Omphalos in Greek tradition, but we also see it in other cultures, or the Benben stones of ancient Egypt. Cusco in Peru also translates to the navel of the world. So just like Mount Kailash in Tibet or Peru, we see the navel of the world. Rapa Nui, Easter Island, another one of these enigmatic places, the center of the world. Rapa Nui translates to the navel of the world. And this will be a repeated theme. For instance, Piazzi Smythe pointed to, but the pyramid. Now, the exact geographic land center of the Earth depends on your method. However, in some methods, the Mercator projection, for instance, the Great Pyramid or the Giza Plateau, is at the geographic center of the world. But again, where is the geographic center of the world? It is where you are standing. That is the actual center, and that's why these different cultures have this same theme, because it's where you are. You know, it's something else to consider. But again, this is a common theme, the centers of the world. Previous episodes I looked at where's the modern center of the world now. Well, you could say New York, or you could say London. They're the political, financial capitals of the world, and these other places, whether it's Egypt or Rapa Nui or Cusco or Mount Kailash, they are the center of the world. So in a sense, now, Great Pyramid of the center of the world, but let's go back to the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. And okay, so that was the center of the Greek world, the Temple of Apollo, the Oracle of Delphi. This was one of the centers of the Greek world, and where we have the Omphalos, the navel stone, marking this as the center of the world. And to them it was, and there are lots of examples. But for instance, we see this coin sitting on the Omphalos. This is an Omphalos from the Isle of Delos. Now, the Isle of Delos was the birthplace of the sun god Apollo, as well as the moon goddess Artemis, otherwise known as Diana. But the sun god Apollo, the temple of Apollo. Apollo was the sun god, but he was also the god of prophecy, music, and other things. Now, the Oracle of Delphi was also known as the Pythia, from where we get the python. So this Omphalos at Delos, which was the birthplace of the sun god Apollo, the god of prophecy, and we see the connection with the python or the snakes there, which it would be an important theme. So the oracle or the prophetess of Delphi, Apollo, the sun god or the god of prophecy, Pythia, python, and those connections there. Now, there are for instance, this picture is interesting because the Oracle of Delphi is mentioned, for instance, in the movie 300 or the Oracle in the Matrix, but there was more volcanic activity at that time, and the fumes which emerged from there were said to put her into a trance, and that was how she was able to access this prophecy. The plutoniums, which was another interesting ancient sacred sites, or various ones around, and that they also had fumes emerging from there, but that's a separate point now. But there's also an Omphalos at Athens, which connects to the Python. For instance, I think it was Plato who speaks about that there was at the Athens, the Acropolis, the Parthenon, they would feed a python sacred honey cakes, but that connects to the lozenge, this important pattern. Now, let's go for it. Let's have a look. So at Newgrange and sites across the ancient world, but as far afield as Ireland, you'll find this lozenge pattern, this crosshatch, which connects to this particular theme. But let's go. So we have Pythia, or the python, the oracle of Delphi, connected to snakes, as in the Omphalos of Delphi. Now Apollo was said to have conquered the snakes, and he would then guard the Omphalos. Okay, well, let's not go too... So the temple of Apollo at Delphi, where we have this Omphalos, the navel of the world, the center of the world. Now, Zeus connected to the thunderbolt, but also the eagle was one of his important symbols. He sent out two eagles in opposite directions. They met above Delphi, marking the center of the world, and then he threw down this Omphalos, this creation stone, cosmic center, which will connect to Eastern traditions. In part 4 I went into some of this, but marking centers of the world in the Omphalos. So the Vinca culture in modern day Bulgaria, Serbia, they also, amongst so many other cultures, had this Omphalos repeated theme, the navel. And note the bird here is an important theme, which is a repeated theme across multiple cultures. So the Omphalos, it has connections to birds, such as in the temple of Apollo and the birds there. Also to the snake, as in the Omphalos and the python and the snake, connections to the prophetess, connections to Apollo, the sun god and the god of prophecy. Apollo and Artemis, the moon goddess, or Diana, or Apollo, the sun god, were the children of Zeus. But Vinca culture, connections to birds, snakes, and the sun god. Now, if we look at the Benben stones of Egypt, now what were the Benben stones? They were the primordial mound of creation. So we have the primordial waters, and then the mound arose from there. And what do we have? We have snakes and birds connected to this mound in various, so from the earliest up until the later period, but for instance Heliopolis, through then to Thebes and others. But we have the Benben, like literally the shape of it, but also the connections of snakes and birds, especially the double bird, connected to this particular theme across the history of Egypt. Now, when people think ancient Egypt, there's actually several periods of, so New Kingdom, Old Kingdom, the Sate period, Babylonian period, the Ptolemaic period, and they sort of get bundled together. But we do see the same themes connected throughout the history of ancient Egypt, and especially through the Benben stone, and we see cross-cultural connections. I'll put a link in the description. Ninth Heretic has gone into, especially into ant mounds. So whether it's in South America and in Central and Southern Africa, the same concept of the primordial mound, which again, Genesis book 1, the waters, and then the first sun, and then the earth emerging from the waters, which is a consistent common theme across cultures across the world, connecting birds and snakes. For instance, ant mounds, as I mentioned, Ninth Heretic has done some lovely work on this, really deserves a lot more attention, but it doesn't mention certain themes and so doesn't get that attention. But ant mounds connected to snakes, snakes will actually live in ant mounds, and these themes of the primordial mound, and even mounds across the world will so often be next to rivers. So Heliopolis in Egypt was said to be a mound which even during the flooding of the Nile would stay above the waters. And down in Sudan, the Kush period, so for instance the Sudanese for a time ran Egypt, Nubians, and one of their important one of their important mountains there was also referred to as the Benben stone, the primordial mound. So there is not just one, there are actually several primordial mounds, consistent common theme, linked to snakes, birds, and the sun guiders, in the sun first touching the primordial mound, or the Benben stone, or the Omphalos, or the navel, being also a central point of measurement. So the Benben stone, the typo there, the primordial mound of creation, where the sun first touches the earth, or the navel, the center of the world, the Omphalos, the belly button, connections to the double birds and the snakes, which is a theme you'll see in so many other places. So for Vinca culture and Greek, the bird connection to the Omphalos, or the navel stone, the center of the world, where the cosmic creation point, which links to the mandala or the Vasta Shastru, this very, very, very ancient Hindu architectural text, but also connecting to the snakes, a common theme. So even in Garuda and the snakes, for instance, as well, but that's another one. So birds finding the center of the earth, the snake connected to the primordial mound, the sun rising to mark this point of creation, and which brings us to, say, Heliopolis and the Great Pyramid being essentially Benben stone. So the original Heliopolis Benben stone was shaped like this. Then it became an obelisk during the Middle and New Kingdom, but also the pyramid and pyramidions, these pyramided caps being connected to the Benben stone, or the primordial mound, or the Omphalos, or the navel of the world. The capital of Egypt moved throughout different periods, and that would be considered the navel point, or the Benben, or the Omphalos, from which all points were measured centers of power, just like New York and London, and these connections still now, where we find these Heliopolitan obelisks moved to there, and they're also aligning through the pyramid in this awesome way. But obelisks, pyramids, the Benben stone, where the sun first touches the earth, emerging from the primordial waters. For instance, there are points at the Giza Plateau, and the pyramids would be flooded, and so the pyramid would be surrounded by water, very much emerging from the primordial waters. Which brings us, also mentioned earlier episodes, the Voortrekker monument in South Africa. Gerard Modique, the architect, there are these a handful of architects which do these very important monuments. Now, we have the same theme. So on the ceiling of the Voortrekker monument, there's an aperture, and on a certain day, a sun ray will come down and hit the cenotaph, the sacred stone. It is surrounded by 32 rays. These rays reflect the double chevron, the sign of water, by his own description. And these very select, very educated architects who build this, the connection. So we have 32 around the 33rd point. On a certain day, the sun touches the Benben stone, emerging from the primordial waters in a literal and symbolic way. The double chevron sign, the waters, a symbolic rebirth as well. Sacred geometry, the weights and the measures of this temple, a consistent theme. Now the Voortrekker was based on the Wat Benben, which were the mansions of the Benben built by Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Now it's also worth mentioning the double chevron also lovely matches the entrance to the Great Pyramid. Nefertiti and Akhenaten were written out of history. Akhenaten does not appear in the King's List of Egypt. Under Rosicrucian tradition, Akhenaten had a vision of light, and he is Moses in the Rosicrucian teachings. But Akhenaten, he changed the religious practices in Egypt, and then his name and Nefertiti were basically scrubbed out of history because he's almost set up a monotheistic sun cult religion. And soon as he died or was murdered, the priests wrote him out of history. Now, Akhenaten and Nefertiti were either the parents or the grandparents of the famous King Tut. So the so-called quackademics, they actually do hard work in the field. Let's have some respect for them. Have a